So we say he is God the one. So that's the first criteria of God. He has to be the one. The independent. He does not beget, nor is he begotten. He doesn't give birth, nor was he given birth to. And there's none like him. So that's our four-pronged criteria of God. What do you think about that?
I'll think into each one. So start with the first one.
Yeah.
What was that one?
The one. He's one.
The one. That is something I can get behind because Unitarianism is actually about seeing God as one entity. So Catholicism is about the Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Unitarianism is very much simplifying that and actually saying God is one. So that's something I can get behind. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
God being independent. Like he doesn't need to do anything. He doesn't need a child, doesn't need a father or a mother, or doesn't need to do something. So independent, like we,
I would say, I mean, that to me is slightly different to what I grew up with in the sense that I suppose as a Catholic you always taught about being made in God's image and likeness.
Yeah.
So, and there's sort of, a lot of sort of explanations where it's sort of we're very much part of God. Obviously Jesus being God incarnate as well. So it's very much sort of that link between God and man. So I feel like that's a stronger kind of connection that I'm used to anyway when I'm thinking about God and humans.
Right.
Yeah.
What's your name?
James.
James. My name is Zishan. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you too. So James, let's put what you're used to and culture. Let's just put that on ice for a sec, and let's just logically go through and tell me what makes sense to you, what doesn't make sense to you. You're not going to be committing to anything. I'm not going to put you in a corner or anything. Just tell me what you're comfortable with. Tell me what you're not comfortable with. So just logically, we know we've both agreed that he's the one. Independent, does that make sense to you? God needing to be independent?
Yes, it
Logically.
It does, logically, yeah.
And then following on from that, not needing to beget something or begotten himself, which plays onto the independence.
Yes, I suppose on that same train of thought, yeah.
And God not being like something else. For example, me creating the VCR doesn't mean... Sorry, I'm still on... I'm from the era of the
DVD.
DVD. Come on.
Netflix.
Is it on DVD yet, mate? So I'm thinking now, nowadays everything's on Netflix, isn't it? Yeah. So if I, for example, programmed the receiver, as it were, of these satellite programs or whatnot, I don't need to become like it, or it doesn't need to be reflective of that. That's why we have, and there is none like him. What do you think about that?
I mean, as a starter with, I do think I'm happy with not having a completely nailed down perception of what God is. So I do think that's something that I could be, open to believing, but it's not something that I would definitively sort of say,
But it makes logical sense, though. Yeah. Because if we're saying that this is somebody that is transcendent, this is somebody that's all powerful, all loving, all hearing, then surely it's like, it's an analogy that I've used. Maybe you can tell me how good it is or not. I use the example of two cars talking. So one car says to the other, the one who's created us, Henry Ford, whoever makes these cars. They've got arms. What arms? Well, you mean doors? No, they're made out of flesh. Flesh? You mean metal? No, they eat burgers and stuff. You mean petrol? Like, it's inconceivable for a car or something like with similar analogy. So that's why, like, for God, especially that if God is somebody that we rely upon, God has no beginning, has no end, and we need him for our morals. So that's our kind of criteria of a God. And then we believe, and tell me if this is something that maybe you're unfamiliar with. Did you know that as Muslims is part of our aqeedah or our belief to also believe in the previous prophets before the Prophet Muhammad? And of those prophets are Jesus, Moses, and the likes. Did you know that as Muslims?
Yes, I did, yeah.
And how Jesus is actually mentioned more so in the Quran, by name that is, than the Prophet Muhammad.
I think with Jesus, I'm fascinated by Jesus. I think, as I said, with the thing that attracted me to Unitarianism is it was very much distilling down the simple teachings of Jesus. And for me, that is the most important thing, sort of like love thy neighbour, you know, treat people how you want to be treated. He also actually had quite a lot of disdain for strict laws that were in Judaism, for example, that he actually thought weren't important or were outdated. For example, I think there was some sort of law about eating on a particular feast day, and he actually, I think they were tired, and I could have this wrong, but he sort of turned around and said, actually no, we can eat. I think for me it's that simplified teaching that I really hold on to, and I'm going to bring up a topic that we almost certainly won't agree on. Part of the reason why I turned away from Catholicism was because I'm gay. I'm in a loving relationship, I'm in a monogamous relationship. It's a relationship that I value very highly. I think it's very, you know, I respect my partner, my partner respects me. I went to actually school in my Catholic school with a Muslim guy, and he actually messaged me before and actually said I am gay, and he was really struggling with that. And he said, you know, I will be rejected by my parents. I will be, you know, lose all my community, and it really upset me because I have been fortunate that I have been accepted by the community I'm in terms of Unitarianism. My family have come to accept who I am, and that is something that I do really struggle with Islam, because not that culturally I'd be so drawn to Islam. I know there's plenty of British people that are, and not being disrespectful of that.
No.
But it's something that I do have an issue with, because I know within myself that me being attracted to a man isn't morally wrong, I don't think. And I feel now I've got to the point where I've reconciled that within myself, and I don't feel that I'm living less of a life than someone who isn't gay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you touched on two very kind of important topics. I think the first one was you really like the simplicity of the belief of Unitarianism. And it's ironic because this is something that even as a Muslim, we kind of, when we speak to other people, we say that if something truly comes from God, then inherently this is something that should be clear. That it should be something, if we're, for example, saying that, look, belief in God will determine your fate in the hereafter. You have heaven, you have hell. It's literally as, you know, close to binary as that. So now the question would be that surely then if this is a belief that's for all of mankind, it should be reflective in it. That I should be able to explain it to a 6-year-old, to a 10-year-old, to a plumber, to somebody with, you know, a homeless guy with, you know, very little education. It has to be accessible to everybody.
Yes.
And I would argue Islam ticks that box as well. In the sense that our declaration of faith, literally, like if you were to accept Islam, all you would literally say in Arabic is, I testify there's none worthy of worship besides God, and I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of God. It's literally as simple as that. And that is our faith distilled. We believe that there is God, and we believe that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the messenger of God. More specifically, the final messenger of God.
Okay. May I ask why you, because obviously you mentioned that there's other prophets in Islam.
Yes.
Why is, well, obviously Muhammad sort of was a big teacher about, you know, God in Islam. Why is he put on a pedestal above, for example, Jesus?
Yes, interesting. So we believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the final prophet. Yeah. So if you and I, we were alive at the time of Jesus, that testification of faith that I said to you would be slightly different. It would be, I testify there's none worthy of worship besides God, and I testify that Jesus is a messenger of God. We would be following Jesus. But after Jesus passed away, we don't believe he passed away, we believe he was raised and he will return again. So when Jesus left earth, people started changing the scripture. And then as with previous prophets and their scriptures, it gets changed, interpolations, things get added in and things get taken out. But with the Quran, because it was the final revelation, God sent the final prophet after whom there would be no other prophet. after whom there would be a specific time, then the day of judgment would follow. So it's a scripture, it's a teaching that doesn't require anybody to come after it. And what's interesting is you said about Jesus that Jesus came and abrogated the term that I would probably kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to wrongly assume what you said, but Jesus abrogated certain teachings of, say, Moses. We also believe similar, like the previous nations, in order for them to maybe get rid of sin or their treatment of sin and the nature of their relationship with God was slightly different. As society changes, then the rulings have changed as well. And because this is the final revelation with the final prophet, therefore we have we have a degree of teachings which is preventative. So as opposed to don't do adultery, we'll say, okay, don't even go near adultery. Like don't put yourself in scenarios. Like, okay, there's idol worship, don't even go near things that will even lead you to idol worship. So preventative, because there's going to be no explanation afterwards, it needs to be something that's practical in that sense. And in terms of course, the belief that you were saying, one God, one prophet, is there a Trinity? Okay, if Jesus is dying on the cross, when he's saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? What's going on here? Who's he praying to? If he's dying, who's dying? So again, for a layman, it's very difficult to conceptualize and understand. So when it comes to that, I 100% agree with you. The religion has to be something very easy to understand. But with Christianity, again, I'm sure you'll agree, there's so many different versions of the Bible. With, I think you've got the Roman Catholic Bible, you've got the...
there are different versions.
And they've got several books in there, and in one version, and they won't be... But the Quran universally, because God has promised to preserve it, it's very fascinating to see how it's preserved. Because I was a bit of a skeptic back in the days as well. And I said, okay, it's well and good that people are saying it's preserved. How can I measure that today? But what's fascinating is it's actually preserved in 3 ways. Number one, Arabic is a live language in which the Quran was revealed. So it's the 5th most spoken language on the planet. Jesus spoke Aramaic. Aramaic is not a live language. Bro, is it all right if I borrow that umbrella? Is it all right? Because I see it's hurting your eyes. So
Thank you.
Because sometimes, when we're talking and a person's really uncomfortable, you're like, you know what, when is this guy gonna... It's one of those ones. So live language. Jesus spoke Aramaic. Aramaic's not a live language. Vedas, the books of the Hindus, they're in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is not a live language. The Old Testament in Hebrew is not a live language. So in terms of something being a book that is preserved, it has to have certain criteria, and language is important for accessibility. Like you said, certain people will say certain things about this and that. We need to be able to access it. Secondly, manuscripts, that we have manuscripts dating to the time of preservation. The Old and New Testament don't claim that, the Vedas don't claim that. And finally, and this is something that's interesting, it's cultural within Muslims to memorize the Quran from beginning to end from a small age. Like children as young as 6 have memorized it. Yearly, traditionally, we recite it in the Ramadan prayers from beginning to end, pretty much. So practically a person can understand, okay, this book has more likelihood of being preserved than, say, another book.
Last question.
Sure.
So, if as you say, with the notion that, and I'm not, disagreeing or...
No, go ahead, yeah.
With the notion that God is independent from humankind, do you think that putting emphasis on human, written words is not conducive with that belief? Because actually, it could be seen as dangerous to really, for example, with a 6-year-old, forcing them to learn a book that's written by another human, it might not be the pure distilled will of God if God's independent and not the human.
Okay, interesting. So this question came to me when I was actually watching a documentary. It was to do with a documentary on Confucianism in China. And the reason why I'll give you this, because they are non-religious. They don't necessarily believe in a God. They're very secular in their kind of understanding.
Some good teachings in that, actually.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. But when the same question was posed to this individual, because there's certain teachings of Confucius that kids have to memorize.
Okay.
Like amongst Muslims, it's the reasoning is simple. When that teacher was asked, why are you forcing the kids to memorize this when they don't understand it? And the reason that he gave was that this book will ultimately bring goodness to the kids that they fail to understand. So although they don't understand it now, there will come a time that they will not only understand it, they will have access to it. So that's the rationale behind it, that if we believe, of course, after the discussion of evidences and the likes, if a person is convinced that it is from God, and again, the evidences do have to be rational, philosophical, teleological, and we can bounce back and forth with that. Once you accept that it is a book from God, fulfills that criteria, then it's you wanting the best for your child. And then, I agree with you, if your child is incapable of doing that, and you're forcing the child, it's wrong. Yeah. However, in the Quran, we're told that the Quran has been made easy to understand. It's a book, whenever I discuss with a Christian, and I say, do you know of any Christians that has memorized the Bible from beginning to end? They say no, but it's a big book. So I say, well, that's another evidence in favor of Islam that the book is accessible for anybody to not only read, but to memorize as well.
Okay. Would you say that, coming back to my previous point, that if a human has written, a human has written all books, then it may not be the sort of distilled down version of the word of God. Obviously, you believe it is. But, would you say, for example, that some truth is more important than others? So, for example, I think that in the Bible, I know certainly there's some pretty harsh punishments for adultery for women, for example, and it's probably the same in the Quran. Would you say that, certain truths are actually more useful for children to learn than others?
100%. For example, teaching a child about the electric chair, living in let's just say in the United States, is not going to be conducive to that child. For them, they need to understand the nature of law. They need to understand there are certain fundamental relationships, like you said, parents, neighbors, friends, how to function in society. Because as Islam, we put community above the self, and we put God above the community as well. So that's how Islam is different to, say, secularism, that puts the individual above, say, even community as well. Subjectivism. So I 100% agree with you.
But does that community have to be a community that abides by Islam, or would you teach that child that actually Islam comes above even secularist laws in a society?
Look, the thing is, human being is a human being, and there's actually a book written by one of the muftis, who's like a senior scholar of Egypt, regarding non-Muslims in Muslim lands. And if you read that, you would have a very different understanding on what Sharia actually is, because the word Sharia has actually been weaponized. But me even speaking to you right now is Sharia. Me reading the Quran is Sharia. Me watering my peace lily at home because it removes 5 chemicals from my room is Sharia. These are all within Sharia. So I guess just to answer your point, which is non-Muslims, Muslims, whoever they are within the community. For example, my neighbor, whether he's Muslim or non-Muslim, if I am eating and he's not eating, it's my responsibility to feed thy neighbor. Whether it's someone's a homosexual or someone's not a homosexual, that doesn't mean I can't have a good conversation with them. And frankly, and this was what we were going to come to as well, but because you said 2-3 points and we were on the second one, I hadn't forgotten that. But so what if your child is a homosexual, that doesn't mean you abandon that child. If you believe as a Muslim homosexuality is wrong, that's more of a reason for you to keep regular contact with the child. Do you see?
Obviously I disagree with that sentiment, but I agree with
the notion that you don't.
I can see what you're saying. Also, could it be seen as disrespectful or culturally insensitive for a Muslim to insist that their beliefs are superior to the cultural beliefs of a particular society, especially when someone from that society, say from the UK, went to Saudi Arabia and insisted they were culturally superior in that society.
Yeah, it actually reminds me, you know, when it came to the Qatar World Cup, you had people that were insisting upon wearing the LGBTQT band, and they were saying, look, this is our country, these are our beliefs, can you respect it? And no, we have to enforce this morality upon you. And there was that whole morality kind of discussion. So yeah, I mean, if I'm living in the UK, I was born and bred in the UK, I have a certain belief, and I believe on the ranking of truth. I believe, just like, for example, if we're dealing with, is there a God or is there no God? So truth to me would be, after looking and analyzing the evidences, there is a God. So for me, that's a truth statement now. So if somebody says, no, there is no God, I say, okay, why do you say that? For them to say, look, no, both can be right, I say respectfully, I would disagree. You can't say there is God and there is no God. However, if the law of the land says that this is what's said, because I was a teacher for quite a while, and Ofsted would come, Ofsted would have certain stipulations. Regardless of the fact that we were a faith school, LGBT had to be something that was there as literature, had to be something that was taught. That's the law of the land. That's what you do. Although certain Orthodox Jewish schools, they would get a good or concerning or whatever it is, they say, no, we're not going to tell you that it's okay or whatnot. With certain faith schools, this is the kind of thing that they're having. But the point is that if it's a law of the land, it's the law of the land. We don't start taking the law into our own hands and start doing X or Y. But if a community disagrees with it, they I'm sure you'll agree, they have a right to kind of say, look, we disagree with this. We don't think that this is this is ethical. This is if we're discussing morality, where are you getting your morality from? I'll tell you where we're getting our morality from. Let's discuss and see which is.
That's perfectly,
So in that sense, but unfortunately and sadly, some people, they don't see it like that. Like, I'm sure you know, there's this whole right-wing and left-wing debate going on now. The Conservative Party are tightening the screws when it comes to the LGBT. Before, when it came to, when I say the LGBT in the sense of sports participation of transition,
that's a difficult subject.
It is, but what I'm saying is that before, participation was kind of left open. Now there's government intervention into it, and they've kind of drawn the line in the sand, saying we're opting for this side. People are saying we're opting for this side. Gender segregatory toilets was a bit like, okay, this as a corporation, we're going to opt for this. So there wasn't clarity in terms of what the government, like Putin's government has drawn the line in the sand, saying we're Orthodox Christians. This is not something we're going to entertain.
I think also with LGBT stuff, it's easy to, as you say, with culture wars, assume that there is this ideology, which I know some people subscribe to. Obviously, plenty of gay people don't subscribe to that, or trans people or whatever. So, you know, some people are they subscribe to a set of beliefs around that. But in reality, with some religions, it's people, there's grey areas, you know, where people agree with certain things and not with others. So I think that's something to bear in mind as well. And there are LGBT people that are religious, like, for example, me, I've got some degree of being religious. So it's really interesting. I need to go to my sister's 21st birthday.
Really nice to meet you, James. That was a nice conversation.
Really nice.
And take care, James. And I'm just going to take that microphone.
Thank you.
If you're here and you want to talk next time, I'll be here as well. Take care. Bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome salam.
Great work, man.